Hello. So this talk is about the thought processes and the questions which we raised when we did a final walkthrough, a detailed walkthrough of the land. And this happened at the point when logically the land ticked off as many of the boxes in our checklist in terms of this is the land we want to buy. And before we gave the final yes, we did a walkthrough to really understand the ins and outs of the land and also understand if we can do everything we were planning to do and where we can put things on the land.
Yeah, and I'd say it was also to find if there were any question marks, if there were anything we didn't understand about it or anything that would actually become a showstopper for us. So it's to look at the extents of the property as well, because it's quite a large place, quite a rambling place, and we wanted to make sure we could actually see where it started and finished from a very sensible perspective, and just make sure that there was any questions we had of the seller, the seller's agent, or any other agency about what was happening in different areas that could affect what we're trying to do, and just to make sure we understood that really. So it was a very I wouldn't call it a detailed walkthrough, but a careful walkthrough really from the perimeter in, and just really trying to tease out specific questions. And I think one of the first one that really sort of came up, that was sort of jumped at us, was really understanding the perimeter of the land. And it sounds like this kind of thing would be obvious. This was a surveyed piece of property, so the land came with a survey map that showed the coordinates and everything of where the boundary points were, and these were marked on the land as well with painted sticks and ribbons and everything like that, and there was a wall around most of the property. So a lot of it was quite straightforward, but there were still some ambiguous areas, where it is quite an old piece of land. There are new houses on one side, old farms on the other, so there's a real mix of boundaries around the place. And so to try and make sure we understood, where the boundary finished, like say there's a wall it's a really old stone wall that's 6 feet wide, I think, typically running up, or 4 or 5 feet wide maybe, running up, old western wall. Is the boundary in the middle of the wall, or do we own the whole wall, or do we own nothing of the wall? We just come up to the edge of it. And so, how do we, how is that classified? And so that was a question we had
Was the wall 5 feet wide?
It was very wide. Yeah.
Really? I'm 5 feet tall.
It was very wide wall, and it turns out there that it is complicated. We own up to the kind of middle of the wall, and so there are various other property owners who own or are partially responsible for the other half of the wall. And so this is very different to a fence that's a couple of inches deep. This is it's a complex structure. It's a very old structure. This must have been built 100 years ago or something. This wall, it's a old-fashioned wall. If this falls over, that kind of responsibility is, maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal, but something you want to understand where that fits.
So the land is a mixture of forested area and open area, and bulk of it's a total of 8.5 acres. Bulk of it is forested, which is probably at least 5 acres, and out of the remaining 2.5 to 3 acres, which is not forested or where the trees have been taken down, about half of it has been mowed really well, and the rest of it has a lot of reeds growing through. But we tried to walk as much of the land as possible in the flat area and through the boundaries. So when we were walking along the boundaries, we were taking a look at how well the boundary is, whether it's obvious. So the stone structure was running through most of the land, and as we were walking along, we were looking to see where the neighbors' houses were, how it looked, because it'll give us an idea of what are we going to see at night. Can we see lights? Will we be, how much of a privacy we have if you're going to build certain small structures which are spread out all over the land. It also gives us a good idea about slopes versus flat land. Remember, we are going to use passive solar design, so it's very important that you understand where you get the sun. We also had to consider where you can have a good view in the flat section. So where there were no trees, there were still slopes and trees were blocking some parts. So we were just walking around throwing out ideas, telling, oh, this is where the house will be, this is where the kitchen would be, this is where you want the septic, how much space is there for the septic leach field, because the septic area is marked out roughly where the septic comes. So once you start talking about these things loudly, even though it's not the final plan, things will just start coming out. You think it's not important, but little questions will start coming up. And where we wanted the vegetable garden and where we were going to put the fruit trees. Then we did things like we had taken little garden tools where we dug up the ground where we said we are going to put a vegetable garden. We dug up the ground where we thought we'll be putting fruit trees because we knew that an old house used to sit there. And guess what? We did hit stones. So the foundation has not been cleared up completely. So we are aware that we might have to dig up and put topsoil before we plant things.
Or the digging will just be more complex. We can't just expect to shovel out some soil and plant a tree, and it's going to be a heavier piece of work than that.
Yeah.
It also brought up some interesting points of what was left of the old house that could affect us, and one part was the fact that there had been a well on the land at one point in time, and legally you can only have one well in a property. And so the fact that there had been one, but fortunately it had been properly capped off or filled in or whatever they do to close these things off. So that's a thing to watch out for.
Yeah, and we were checking our Verizon connection as we walked through the land. Both of us had Verizon. So we brought it up with the seller's agent. So he gave us a piece of information telling, I use AT&T and AT&T coverage is also good over here. That's just a data point to know that you can safely connect from there.
Yeah. It was also good walking about that you can see, when you spend a little bit of time like that on the land, how active the neighbours are. They obviously see people in the land, they know it's up for sale, and they, you can see if they poke their head around the wall or whatever to see what's going on. And it, looking around as well, you can see if there's been intruders at any point in time, if there's beer bottles or if there's rubbish people have dumped in the place. You can tell if it's, if the land has been improperly used, I suppose.
Yeah, and again, that was something else which came up as we were walking, and when we saw a bottle, we were like, oh, we haven't seen a bottle or any garbage dumped, which is quite common in land. And we were able to check with the seller's agent, and that was another data point telling this is a fairly safe piece of land which doesn't have intruders. Because once you own the land, you do not want people coming on the land. Even if you don't have anything, you don't want someone getting on the land, tripping and falling and then suing you. So it's always good to know how safe the area is. Of course, things can change, but it still gives you an idea. And we tried to stand on locations which were as high up on a slope as possible and look around to see what's the view you get. Yes, it was summer, the trees were filled with leaves, but you still kind of get an idea of what you're seeing.
Yeah. So it was a useful exercise, and to try and also looking around the trees, there were quite a few, that looked quite healthy and going okay. Other ones were obviously sort of dead but still standing up. Others had died and half fallen over or propped up others. So you could see that maybe not immediately, but at some point, there would be an effort required to clear some of these, and a couple sort of toppling over near the road. So is that going to be a problem that's going to hit us up? So it's just trying to get a feel for issues that are going to come up and not surprise you later on, and the whole trees thing actually,
Yeah, we were trying to, we are both city people, but we are trying to see if we could identify the trees or if we could see too many dying trees. We found quite a few walnut pieces, and sure enough, we were told there are walnut trees in the land. We saw one tree which was marked with a yellow chalk mark, and turns out when we queried about that, it was a dead tree which needed to be brought down, but the wood was good, so we can potentially use it for firewood. And we also kept a lookout like Alan said, for logs of wood, there's plenty of trees which have fallen down. So can you move it? And there were stones all over the place, which obviously were used to build the stone wall or from pieces which fell off the stone wall. So those were things also which we can then use in our building. What else? As we were walking around, we realized how easy it is to get lost in land, and then we realized we need some kind of software where we can mark a GPS coordinate as we walk the land to say, okay, so this is a clearing where we can build a little activity shed, or this is a clearing where there are interesting stones we need to pull out, or where there is a fallen log which we need to take away. And we were getting lost, we didn't know where we were. So we realized we would need a piece of software where we can plot all this out. And we realized that we would like to identify the trees, and we'll need a method to mark, the trees and bushes. So all these things, as we were talking, to each other, just bringing things up, it gets your mind going, basically. So it's always nice if you should have at least one other person you can talk to. But if you have 3 or 4 friends who can give you random views, or you can brainstorm with as you're walking the land, you should probably do it when you reach the stage where you're pretty sure you're going to get the land, but you want to
you get all the perspectives,
cross the T's,
have,
dot the I's. And
the seller's agent was very good at responding to a lot of these queries and questions we had. He was able to either answer them directly or tell us where we could find the answers and what we should worry about and what really wasn't a concern, which was great news.
Yeah, and the Platt had areas, because the land was perk tested, it had an area marked out for the septic system, and then an area which was marked out for the suggested well. And we walked around searching for the 4 corners of the septic area and the well, and we couldn't find the well, so we had to set up a meeting with the seller's agent to find that, and also to show us one of the corners of the land, because we did not find the land survey markings.
It was ambiguous, basically. And there was also, there's a number of different bits of information that relate to land. Part of it in different counties are different, I guess, but they've got things like, they call it GIS Maps, which show boundaries of all the different properties around, and it's like tax boundaries for each property. And then there's the actual survey of the land, and the survey is the official one, and quite a few pieces of land we saw didn't all align together. Sometimes the GIS maps would be slightly out, as they were in this piece of land. Other times they'd been completely out. They'd been a few hundred feet in the wrong direction, and it's very confusing. And you might say, well, does that really matter? And it does really, because you have to balance how much it matters. But if you're trying later to do something, or there's a zoning discussion or something going on, and there's a particular agency referring to a GIS map, and everybody knows it's wrong, but trying to get something like that changed is no small task. It's a typical government agency.
I'll talk about all the documents and that you need to look at when you're looking at a piece of land in a separate video.
So that's just to mention it.
But it's good to have a walk through the land and brainstorm with friends, a couple of friends, just about all your thoughts about how you plan to use the land, and any questions you might want to ask. Even if you're sure you want to buy the land, the day of settlement is your chance to ask any little question, which, if the seller is friendly enough, they can provide you with information. So if they know the neighbors, if they know anything about the weather, when the roads get busy, any little thing, why he had marked the tree off, and when we were asking some of these questions, the seller's agent gave us some interesting information about forest conservation, programs, county extension programs, which we are going to be using, and we list in our resource list for you.
and they come up in other videos in some more detail.
Yeah, okay.